Hey, well, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening today. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of Simply Inspired podcast. And today I'm truly honored and truly blessed to be joined by a very, very special guest, legendary ultra runner, Krissy Moehl. Hopefully I'm saying that the right way. Now, this lady really, am I not saying that the right way? Correct me on that because I've been practicing this.
It's all right. It's mail like mailbox, very Americanized. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Sorry about that. Krissy Mail, like mailbox. Now this lady has a long list of achievements, too many for me to mention them all here, but just to give mention to a few. Obviously, she was the youngest woman to win the Grand Slam of ultra running, which included a gold medal at the Vermont 100-mile endurance run. Set the women's record for hard rock 100-mile endurance run as well in 2007, holds the women's record for the fastest known run of the 170-mile Tahoe Rim Trail in 47 hours. It never fails to amaze me, these crazy blocks of hours that ultra runners competed in more than 100 ultras, I believe, including UTMB as well, which needs to mention twice. What else we got? Oh, and of course, the author of Running Your First Ultra, a guide to ultra marathons. Krissy is also a race director, a coach, a very, very busy and inspirational person in all ways. Now, obviously, today we'll be talking about certain key races, but we'll also be talking about mindset, motivation, inspiration, and going a little bit deeper into the process of chasing your dreams and goals. So, Krissy, sorry about talking about you in third person for a minute there. But
Oh,
thank you very much for coming on the show, and thank you for making time for this today. As I mentioned, I'm very grateful for that.
awesome. Yeah, I appreciate the intro, but also a little getting to chat with you a little bit before. I always feel like credit needs to be given. The Tahoe Rim Trail has since been broken. Corinne Malcolm did that during like this, I think 2001, 2002. She got after it and set the new course record for the Tahoe Rim Trail. So awesome things happening in our sport always.
Absolutely, absolutely awesome. That's nice of you to give that a mention, and yeah, very, very humble. I like that as well. So, right, so starting at the beginning, obviously, not literally the beginning of your life, because no, I know you've been running a long time since high school in different forms and everything like that. But one of the things I do want to ask you, going back to that sort of timeline in your very early years of sports, for the purposes of inspiration, did you always expect to go as far in sports, in running, or in any form of running back, say, when you were in high school or in those early years as you did now? Or have you since, it sounds like you've exceeded your own expectations?
Yeah, and I think that's been the loveliest part about finding ultra and trail running is there weren't any expectations. There was nobody setting like there was no like nobody was making a career of it back in the early 2000s. It was this like really homegrown awesome community of people that I found that showed me how to get to places that I just only looked at and thought were pretty. And now I'm figuring out, oh, there's trails that take you there. Oh, like if you use your own like two legs, you can get to the top of these awesome peaks. So it was really organic upbringing. I found it really early. I was 21, 22 years old when I ran my first Chuckanut 50K, which I'm now the race director of, and just surrounded by people just loved being out in the woods. And the other cool thing about the sport at that time was it was more people that were moving around in the mountains and then wanted to do it a little bit faster, where we've watched the sport evolve to like where I came as a like track and cross country runner and found trails, and so didn't have the mountain running experience or just mountain experience period. So I feel really lucky to have come in when I did, to be taught by people that understood weather and conditions and looking at terrain and maps and like being able to see 3D profile by looking at terrain lines and topo maps and stuff. So I learned a lot from my mentors early on and came at the sport more as a runner, where I feel like more runners are finding the sport now. And there's still mountain people that want to move fast in the mountains. It's just there's a bigger influx of, I guess, all people really. The sport's grown so much.
Absolutely. It's incredible because you are really a veteran and you will have seen a lot of changes over those years as well, which is something funny you should mention that. I was going to ask you about this later, but as soon as we've touched on it now, we'll talk about it now. Some of the changes you've seen in the sport, I mean, obviously you will have seen a lot of changes as you touched on there. Maybe to narrow it down to one or two things that you really enjoy about how the sport has grown in recent years and obviously continues to grow, more people taking part, more women taking part, as you said, more sponsorships, full-time runners, etc. But in your own words, what are maybe, I don't know, one or two of your favorite things you've seen in terms of the development of ultra running in the years that you've been involved?
You know, the experience, it's like a personal experience that came to mind. I ran my last competitive race, had this amazing mic drop moment in my words. I got to run the Gaoligong 165-kilometer race in China in March of 2018. And just this grand finish. I was first woman, 10th overall, like finished on this man-made dock. There's laser lights and smoke bombs, and the guy that announced the Olympics was announcing the finish. It was just unreal. And I thought, I'm 40 years old. This is a good way to go out. And I thought, oh, a couple months later, I'll be back at it. And, that amidst the pandemic hitting, it's really, there's been a enough of a pause that I feel like I've not been in the racing scene as personally as much. I love coaching clients and hearing about their experiences and staying in touch with the racing world that way, but my own experience. And so I just went back this May and ran the Tiger Claw 50K, which was awesome. And I probably should have trained a little, I know I should have trained a little bit better for. And what I noticed was that I feel like having that time gap was really cool to like show up at this event and be like, whoa, the sport is familiar, but it's new. It's changed. Like more people, like when I started the sport, more people looked like I do now, like in their mid 40s and 50s, towing the line. Now the sport looks like I looked at, like I was like, where are all my, where's my generational people? The sport is so much younger and flashier and more colors. The products have changed. Like we were just making other items work. Now there's really sport specific stuff, and you see it in coming from multiple brands, not just one or two that like dabble in trail running. So just to see that on display with that significant like 5-year time gap, it just kind of stood out to me. And I thought it was like a really fun example of how the sports has changed. And for an old timer like myself to still have it feel familiar. So the community aspect is still there. It's like arms open. You want to be in the mountains all day. Let's talk about our experiences. Cool that some person Tyler Green can crush the 50-mile course and stick around and cheer for anybody coming in for the next 5 hours. Like it's that there's like vibes that are still continuous there. And then the noted changes of how much younger the sports become and colorful. Like I love all of the integration of brands bringing their flair, individuals bringing their flair. It's really kind of like call it homecoming almost.
Absolutely, that is amazing. That's an amazing perspective. I knew when I asked you that question, Krissy, it's a big question, given the breadth of your experience. But what a cool answer! I love it.
Oh,
So obviously, we need to look back at a few of your key races. Now, this is pretty big. So one of the ways I usually condense this down a little bit is to ask people which ones are their own personal favorites. Now, when you take time to reflect on your career and look back at certain races and everything like that, I'd like to talk about which ones stand out to you the most. And when I ask this question, as I mentioned, I love it because you never know which ones are going to come back. I often think, oh, it will be somebody's biggest win or their most well-known win. And sometimes it's something else altogether that means the most to that person. So, as I say, out of everything you've achieved, sorry to drop a big question on you, but which ones are your personal favorites, your most special moments, if you had to pick just a handful?
And like being in the sport this long and podcasts becoming such a thing in the last 5 years, that question has been asked a lot. And what I found is different ones pop to mind every time the question gets asked. So I think that there's something curious there of why the brain decides to pull on some at some points, and like probably has to a lot to do with how I'm feeling in the moment or whatever. Right now, I'm probably a little bit nostalgic, and that first Chuckanut was pretty like impactful, kind of life changing. I came out and won my first ultra, and I'd been an okay track and cross country runner in high school and college, and just feel like all things clicked running along the Chuckanut Ridge. And oh, it was sideways rain. It was brutal weather. I was wearing a fleece vest that was soaked and super heavy, like all these things that just, and even with all of that, I knew I was right where I was supposed to be. And to have that kind of moment so early in life, I remain super grateful to have found the thing that makes me click, thing that's like the most consistent stream in my life so early. Like I definitely know people that are just finding whatever that is. It doesn't have to be running and running long distances, but they find it later in life. And man, that it like hit me in my like 20, what is I, 21, 22, and to remain so consistent now, turning 46 later this year. I'm like, that's pretty amazing. So that stands out for like life affirming as well as like directional, like taking me on a path. Um, Also feels right now pretty nostalgic. The UTMB, Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, is celebrating its 20th running. And I happened to be at the 2003 inaugural event. And the way they ran it that year was all runners started together in Chamonix, and you could stop in Courmayeur, you could stop in Champex-Lac, or you can make the full turn back to Chamonix. And so I jokingly say by default, I won because I was stubborn enough to keep going all the way around the mountain. So that event, there's pictures popping up on social media and stuff right now of Krissy and my then husband. It was our honeymoon actually. We just look like babies. Like, and that was my first event. I don't call it my first 100-miler because they had to cut it short that year, and it was only 95 miles. But really, that's like kind of that 100-mile like experience, what that takes to finish that distance. The next year, I ran the Wasatch 100, and I call that my first 100. Gosh, yeah. So those two kind of stand out in terms of the like where my brain is right now with nostalgic feelings, and how that's, life directional moments of getting me to where I'm at right now.
Absolutely, yeah. It's amazing to hear the inside track on those. I can understand how it would change around and shift around, but it's very cool that you shared that from the point of view of what you experienced, how you grew as a person, and everything. Not just the times and all that stuff. I was hoping you would. Now, another thing on that topic of favorites, obviously. Doing what you do with running, I mean, you get to see some incredible locations. You get to spend a lot of time in those locations in a way that very few other people would do, other than obviously other runners. So when it comes to somewhere that you've been able to visit, somewhere that you've been able to experience, that stayed with you, that you wouldn't have been able to experience had you not been a runner, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, again, there's probably quite a few that stand out here, but if we narrowed it down to sort of a handful, what would be some of your favorite places you visited through ultra running?
The one I just pops to mind is Japan. I've been back 3 different times, 3 or 4. I got to race early on in my career, the Shinetsu, or that was the second one. The first one was the Hasegawa Cup, uh, 2004, somewhere in there. And then returned in 2010, I believe, to run the Shinetsu Five Mountains, directed by Hiroki Ishikawa, fellow Patagonia ambassador. And then in 2013 ran the Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, or excuse me, the Fuji, Ultra Trail du Mont Fuji. And yeah, all of those experiences always wowed me. Just as a young person growing up, I always thought like New Zealand and Australia had this mega appeal to me, like runner or not, that's someplace I wanted to go. But I loved going back to Japan. I didn't make it to New Zealand until 2019. So I ran for almost 2 decades before I even made it to the place I would have thought I would have gone. And just loved everything about Japan, from the vast differences of the quiet like sanctuary in small towns versus like the crazy boom of Tokyo and lights and everything, that like the overstimulation of Tokyo, I would say. And then mostly it was like interacting with the people that loved, like, there, it was such a fanfare around ultra running. And so I guess first I would say the experience of just like walking on the streets and obviously not knowing how to read the signs or whatever, and the gratitude just by quickly sharing with somebody like, hey, can I get some help? My, like, how quickly they were to help and wanted to practice English and interact with you. And then like, so just like a really personal experience. I always traveled with gifts. Anywhere I've gone, I've always taken something to share. And in Japan, I came back with more than I went with, because like, there's just this constant exchange of um, whether it's like a small written note or a handkerchief or something. There was just this constant, if you gave something, it had to come back. It's just like a joyful piece of the culture that I loved. I love the food in Japan. I raced so well on the spread that they had on the tables over there. And then I remember after winning Ultra Trail de Mount Fuji, we had a Patagonia event in one of the, I think it was the Yokohama store. And I stood around after presenting for like an hour and a half signing jackets and phone covers and like all these. It was like this rock star moment that as an ultra runner, like that doesn't happen at that point. It didn't happen back in the States. It's maybe happening a little bit more in these later decades, but there was just so much, I just joy and gratitude and like, I don't know, like I always came back with my cup full after trips to Japan. So that one surprised me.
Wow, that is incredible as a story. The people there, the lessons you learned along the way, it's fantastic. One other thing to touch on with that, as soon as you're saying about your cup being full and whatnot, it's a very nice way of putting it. Obviously, you've been able to do what you love professionally for many years. Not a lot of people get that opportunity. So we'll come back to running itself now in a minute, but how has achieving everything that you've achieved and training and pushing yourself and all the things that you do, how has that improved your life in areas outside of running?
Mm.
Because obviously people focus on Krissy the athlete, which is obviously a massive part of it, but as in terms of Krissy, the person day to day, do you see a lot of benefits from it in other areas of your life, dealing with people or in your mindset or other types of things that cross over, if that makes sense?
I do think I understand what you're saying. I feel like if anything, ultra running has been, and trail running, mountain time, have been the constants in my life. And if I ever need a check-in, that's where I go. If it's out my door because of whatever's going on and I need some perspective, running has been able to provide that. And it's because it's so helpful that way. It's a really good motivator to stay healthy. Like, to, I've been through a few injuries, and not having that ability to gain perspective quickly, like what a run does for me, has pushed me to find gaining that perspective through other practices. Like meditation is a great one that's taken me a while to integrate, but now that I have, it's such a great tool. And I actually, to draw that parallel, I think running gets you to that meditative state. So I just needed to be able to find it while not moving. Um, the influence, I think, comes from like, yeah, gaining that perspective. What I've had to learn is how to then communicate that back. So like I learn these great things or have these epiphanies or whatever, that what running gives me with the people in my life that I'm close to. I need to then share that. Like there was this point in my life where I just go figure it out. And then like that communication piece was missing. So that bringing that full circle has been, I think, what life has influenced running as opposed to running influencing life, like learning pieces here and taking them back and forth. I guess one can make the argument that I've always been a person that's had crew. Like I love having people come to these big events or crew at FKTs, and that takes a lot of communication. So taking that skill and putting it into life, just making sure that whatever you're thinking through, like you involve the people that it has brought to life, or has been a part of it. guess that's a quick answer. You could, I don't know if there's something more we want to dig into there, but
No, it makes a lot of sense. It really does. I mean, I like the, as you said, the sort of two-way street thing, running, influencing life, life influencing running back and forth. It makes a lot of sense. No, I mean, I understand that. I've seen things even on your website with talking about gratitude, and there's this was it 80 seconds of gratitude concept, and I've seen some of these things, and it makes sense now with the meditation because, to be honest, I do get a little bit of that spiritual vibe from you in a nice way, in a very calm, sort of centered way. I mean that as a compliment. So I'm not surprised that that's come into it. So no, very, very, very cool. In terms of going deeper, Krissy, you mentioned that. Is there anything else you'd like to share about that, or are we happy we've covered that one? I just want
um, yeah, I could say I'm sure there's something else like more specific, but I think that's a good
It'll
one for
pop up later. No, that's cool. I'm happy with that answer. I mean, as you say, it shows people the growth process. Now, another thing to touch on with races. Shortly, I'm going to go into a few other mindset topics, your race directing, a few other things. People always want to know though about the toughest terrain that you've raced on or whatever. And the reason I ask this is obviously different people have different opinions on this. I mean, I've heard people say hard rock being one of the toughest. Some people say it's say I don't know Badwater. They often tout that as being very tough. There's different ones. Obviously UTMB with that terrain, but in terms of your experiences of the most challenging races, in terms of the terrain, but also in terms of anything else. If there were things going on in your life outside of running that you had to sort of
Mm.
focus through, that's a big one that happens. I mean, it's not always going to be perfect on the build up to a race or even during a race. So there's different things, but basically, in your own words, which ones stand out for being challenging in whatever form that challenge happened to take at that time?
Oh, I'm glad you offered that last little bit about like outside life factoring in. Because as I was sitting there being very literal, which I am, about terrain, I wasn't coming, like an answer wasn't really coming to me. But once you added like outside life, 2009 was a really challenging personal year. But it was a very like, what do you want to like 2006 and 2009 were probably the hardest personal life years, but they also shine as my like um biggest career builders. If calling running ultra running my career, I set 11 course records in 2006, the year I got divorced. So like how running was integrating to help me process. And then also people would accuse like kind of running away from. I always felt like I was running towards. And by having running as a tool to gain perspective and like work through this like pretty challenging life change, I felt like, yeah, some of it was done in anger, but anger was part of processing. And if I feel like there's other ways that energy could be channeled, and I feel thankful for having running to then have that as an outlet. 2009 was also the end of another significant relationship in my life. And I also learned that a dear friend had died by suicide that year. And so the Western States and UTMB combo in 2009, um, there was a lot going on in the background. And I feel like in hindsight, there was a lot of distraction used with running. Like training for Western States was like mentally trying to distract myself. I got way too thin. I wasn't taking care of the input to match the output in terms of calories and fueling. I did okay at Western. I got second place. That would be great. I mean, in any other year, I would say that's an awesome finish at Western States. But I ended up in the medical tent for 6+ hours afterwards, needing 2 bags of IV fluid. I passed out, and an ambulance was called. My poor mother was up with me all night. Like there was just so many things that were not lined up for calling that a great run. That's not why I run. That's not how I want to be at the finish line. I feel thankful that I finished and my body didn't fail. My body failed after the finish. It could have failed, miles before, who knows. what I was really thankful for is it put me on the couch for 3 weeks. I was pretty trashed, and I had to really like self-evaluate. What am I going to do here? I'm signed up for UTMB. I believe there was 8 weeks between the two, and it forced me to find like why I run. And it's like, it's the joy of it. And yes, I love to be competitive, but I started that Western States off. Like I was so confident that I had cleared cleared a space on a shelf to bring that cougar home. And so when I came home and had to see that empty space on the shelf, I was like, that's not why I run. Like I don't even have trophies out. I cleared a space on a. I've been running for 9 years at that point. I had plenty of trophies in boxes that they weren't even out. So that like there was some good check-ins there. And when I got to UTMB in 2009, I had a blast. Patagonia had just made our first skirt, and so I was running in a skirt with like nobody had done trail running skirts yet, and tried poles for the first time, and came into mile 70 or so and was checking in on my other friends. This is all kind of captured in that TED talk I did in 2011. Checking the Jureks were running, Scott and Jenny. They weren't married yet, but Scott and Jenny Jurek were running. I was checking in on them. And then my crew, two wonderful women in my life, kind of pulling at the bowl of pasta I was eating. And they're like, Krissy, if you leave now, you'll be in first place. And if the gears didn't turn on and like that competitive edge just come out, and just how wonderful to have learned the lessons of taking care of myself, enjoying the process, and then be able to really push in the end. It was, those two races really taught me a lot. I then in the aftermath, I really had to face all the loss from that year, but I was ready to do it. It was hard, but I was ready to do it, like having that comparison, and then kind of settling into a fall and winter of not a lot of running because my body was pretty cooked.
Wow. It is an incredible insight into, well, basically when things don't go to plan. And it's very much a lesson that people can feed into any area of life, whether it's running related or not, which is my reason for asking that. But thank you very much for sharing, some things about what was quite a personally difficult time. I always respect that. And I know you've done loads of these interviews, but I always respect that because it's not an easy thing to sort of go back and touch on those times. But I respect that because it's for a good purpose. Now, when it comes into a couple of other things with mindset topics and everything like that. Now, the question here, I think it's going to be probably a little bit basic for you, but I want to ask it anyway for the way that it feeds into people's life goals. When it comes to pushing through the pain barrier with what you do, obviously people talk about the cave of pain, and people talk about hitting the wall, and people talk about these different things. Not to dwell on anything negative here because I don't do that in my interviews, but it's an amazing thing about the distances that you guys with ultras do, the amount of hours. I mean, it's practically superhuman from where I'm sitting. So in terms of obviously when your body wants to give up, but your mind won't let it. When I speak to people about this, it seems to be obviously primarily a mental thing. So I was wondering if we could just go into that topic a little bit in terms of some of your methods for pushing through that. Like I said, just because it's something that feeds very well into people's life goals in general, if that makes sense,
Yeah, I hear you. And I feel really lucky that running is like a really joyful, grounding like experience for me, period. Part of that is my biomechanics. Like my body is built to run. Like not, I know that I do believe that everybody can run if they want to. And I also understand that alignment is a big part, and the way our bodies are built, our muscle development. Like there's so much that can work for or against someone. And I'm so thankful that I grew up running, like started in 7th grade, or maybe even before that. And like my body is shaped by this sport, and there wasn't a lot working against me. I was born with hip dysplasia, and my parents did a lot to rehab that as an infant. And there's like some issues that can come up with that now and again, but nothing really working against me. So like in terms of pain, if it's coming on by biomechanics, that's a lot to work through. And I thankfully did not have to fight that a lot. Running for long hours, running for like, through like, tough terrain, weather is something that's always so unpredictable. And like, whether it's heat or cold or humid, or you're at altitude, like how all those conditions factor into the call it the pain experience, because that's what we're focusing on here. I feel like the mindset piece for me is it goes back to just really feeling good in my body and the joy that comes from seeing what's possible. And when those, first trail runs, when the guys took me up on some ridge lines that I didn't realize my body was capable of getting there, and having that aha, like, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. That comes back to me. And I feel so thankful that I get to choose to do it. And I feel like if anything I try in my coaching is to work with people that this sport is a sustainable piece. It's not something that we push through. It is a part of our life. It's something that we're lucky to get to have. There's times when training's harder, and then like keeping that in balance as well, so that it's not, ideally it's not a takeaway. Like the reality is we only have 24 hours in the day. We only have a certain amount of stress to give. And this is a physical stress on our bodies. If there's other stressors in our life, that bucket's going to fill up or be drained, whatever way you want to visualize it, pretty quickly if you're adding all of the like life plus running plus, well, I guess that's the two, but like, if there's pieces of any of those that are making it more stressful or hopefully less, like you have to factor, in my opinion, you have to factor all of that in. So I think something that was really great about, turning my life, focusing it towards ultra running, was I was able to create a schedule that allowed for a lot of stress in my bucket, like, or to add a lot of physical stress. And I simplified in a lot of other ways. It also meant sacrifices from, a way of life I might have thought I was going, the direction I thought my life was going. That was changed by ultra running. And I don't know, I don't know that I would change that. I try not to spend too much time debating that. It's definitely like there's highs and lows of life, and you kind of spin out on that if you want or not. But I would just, I was able to create a life schedule that allowed to really push when I was doing, sometimes 18 events a year. And there was a lot of downtime that had to counter that to keep the bucket in balance, however the visual goes for that. I'm not sure. I kind of went rambling a bit on this one. Does it feel like I answered your question?
Very much. It feels like you combined a few very powerful, very meaningful topics into one answer there. So very happy with that. In fact, I was resisting the temptation to go off on tangents with a few things you said there as well. So no, it's brilliant. Very, very informative question. And as I mentioned, it really is something that feeds into any aspect of life. But I love how you flip that on its head, and fantastic. So a couple of other things to touch on here, related to running, but outside of it, obviously being a published author as well. This is something I'd like to touch on with you, because people look at it, you have the book out, it's very informative, very helpful for people, but not everyone chooses to sort of give back in that way, which is personally the way I look at it from the outside looking in. You're taking your knowledge, the lessons you've learned, giving them back to people who want to grow and develop in this way. Not everyone does that, even when people have achieved a lot. So before we get into the book itself, what was your actual initial sort of spark to want to write down some of your experiences, some of what you've learned in this way? And where did that idea first come from?
I actually, like, in a rare instance, I was contacted by the publisher. I had been writing a blog, which was kind of a new cool thing in the late, like 2007, 8, 9. And they liked the way that I wrote down my experiences. And the publisher it's called Page Street Publishing, and they're a small branch of Macmillan, which is a larger umbrella and one of the big 5 publishing houses. But Page Street focuses on how-to books. And so they had anywhere from, origami to cooking, and the new editor that came on board had a connection to running. And so he, like, through that, they were trying to find someone that could write something of a running book. And they reached out to me. So I have since tried to write another more, call it memoir style book. I have a lot of stories from two decades of running. That's been a harder process. That one's not out on the shelves. I definitely need a writer, and to give some heart and time on my own to figure out how those stories all interconnect. But I have tried to shop it in New York and to the publishing houses, and the connection of the stories is what is lacking. And so I have kind of put that one on the back burner for way too long at this point. So very thankful to Page Street Publishing to reaching out and making that first book possible. And then during the pandemic, I was receiving so much great feedback. Like, it actually went up from, which was surprising. It went up compared to the previous years, which is surprising to me because that one was really directed at races. There weren't any races, but people loved having like some sort of guidance through that very weird upheaval of time, and just in terms of how life experience felt. So I went to the publisher and said, hey, is there some sort of like follow-up piece we could do, or like a training log or something? And they were stoked to rewrite the whole thing. And so that was one of my pandemic projects, was to write the second edition, which was really fun to update. It was only like 5 or 6 years later. And the difference in some of the equipment and stuff was like, I remember there was the first book, it said you might want to have space in your pack for a phone, a camera, and a GPS device. And 6 years later, that was all in your phone. So kind of fun little side notes. I'm rambling. I must need more brain sugar.
No, you're doing great. You're doing absolutely great, because even that with the book, it's something behind the scenes, and it's the things that people don't see. With the book that's more about your life, sort of more personally and everything, I hope that you do publish that. I hope you do get that out there, because again, in terms of the inspiration, in terms of the impact that could have on people, it could be very powerful. So fingers crossed on that one. Fingers crossed. So another thing here, as soon as we're talking about the books and sharing knowledge, because I'll come to your coaching in a moment, but how do you personally assess your impact on the sport of ultra running? So what I mean by this is, obviously, you're a published author, you coach people, you've appeared on TED Talks, you direct races, you're involved in the sport in all different ways. But in terms of, for example, inspiring more people to take up ultra running, maybe more women to take it up, your personal sort of influence, if you like, on the sport with the various records you've broken and everything like that, in terms of the impact it's had on other people. How do you personally measure that, or how do you personally feel about the influence that you've had on other runners, basically, if that makes sense?
I definitely don't measure it. That's it. It's not something that I never set out to do. That wasn't a driver, still is not a driver for me. The greatest gift of writing that book is the wonderful emails or notes on Instagram that I receive from people telling me their journey to ultra running, and how the book has been something that's guided them through. If they've listened to me on a podcast or TED Talk, they can hear my voice because I write similar to how I speak, apparently. So those are the ones that are very touching. And it feels like, gosh, those months of I'm very much an extrovert. And so being locked up writing, it's kind of how it felt to me, because I have to just focus to get stuff like that done. So just hole up away by myself for those couple of months. Those follow-up emails, that just means the world to me. And I guess that's a way that you like, it's not a measure. It's like an energy coming full circle. Like, I put energy in, and then that gratitude comes back, and like that motivates me to do more. Honestly, it's just to feel that exchange. Race directing is a similar thing. Like, I love creating a space, a scene that people get to come have their first ultra running experience, first or 10th or whatever. But I really hone in on those, like, people that didn't think something was possible, but they took on the challenge, and then I get to create the stage that they come and see if it's possible. Like I just, there's something that just lights me up. Maybe it's because it's like how cool it felt when I did that, and I can still tap into that, seeing it in other people. I've wondered that. Um, my organizational brain, spreadsheet brain, loves pulling together all the pieces and then seeing the end result. So yeah, I guess it's like an energy piece, is the full circle, like, and that's what will help me like weed things out of my life as well. If it doesn't feel like the energy is like giving and going around, that helps me be like, you know what, I have a lot of places that I want to put energy into. I don't want it to go into a black hole, so I'll make choices that way.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, again, that's an important life lesson in and of itself. You know, what you give out is what comes back. But yeah, I love that because I know obviously with yourself, everything we've talked about so far, it makes references to running being very much an inner journey for you in terms of what you said earlier about the personal growth and meditation, you know, these different or the meditative aspect of running, you know, these different things. Obviously the fact you're effectively sort of a pioneer because you were doing this when the sport wasn't as big as it is now. So all of these things, but then through that you've had that impact. So it's really, really good to touch on that. Touching on TED Talks just
Mm.
briefly, you know, I'd like to give that a mention. It's very, very worthy of giving a mention. Um, with this one, I don't really have a massively sort of specific question about it, but I'd just like you to describe the experience of
Mm.
being on TED Talks. I mean, you mentioned being an extrovert, and again, I get those very warm, welcoming vibes when I'm talking to you. So I'd imagine you enjoyed the public speaking, but can you share with us a little bit about you didn't? Oh wow. So was it let's flip that on its head then. Start at the beginning. When they first approached you, was your reaction sort of okay, where do I sign? Or oh my God, I don't know if I can do this, or somewhere in the middle? Let's start there. When they first approached you, what went through your mind in that moment?
Oh man. Gosh, yeah, I haven't thought back to that in a while. I was in a rough mental state, to be honest. Kind of follow up to that whole 2009 piece. There was a big part of me that did not want to put myself out there. I didn't want to do anything that I didn't know that I could complete. I didn't want to start a relationship if I thought it was going to fail. I was just in this very protected, guarded state. And when I was asked to do the TED Talk, I public speaking was not in my genre. Like it wasn't something I'd done. And to be honest, like race directing, what I love about it is I'm behind the scenes. I'm not, even though I'm the race director, like I hire somebody else to do the announcing. I am not the one that wants to be like front and center. I like pulling all the pieces together. So yeah, public speaking was something that felt really challenging, and it woke me up from that protective state of, I knew I couldn't half-ass it. I knew if I just kind of wrote down maybe what I wanted, I wouldn't get to do it because they needed a full draft from me before they like accepted me to. They invited me, but wasn't a guaranteed speaking opportunity. I needed to show what I was going to present, and I knew if I didn't put my all in, then I probably wouldn't get it. And there was that scared part of, if I put my all in and I don't get it, that's going to really suck. And I wasn't wanting to deal in that space then, but I decided that I wanted it so badly that it was worth taking the risk. And oh my gosh, I'm so thankful, because life is not worth living if you're living in that guarded state for too, in my opinion, like that was a good wake up call, and then very rewarding because I then got to do the TED Talk. Who knows where the lesson would have gone the other way. I want to think it would have been a good wake up to try again harder for something else. But yeah, so that's like the really beginning part of that was more so this great like recheck in on life and get me fired up again. And then yeah, I remember getting up there on the stage, and I think I even like noted about how my heart is pounding in the event. I was like running a 5 or 10K being up there. I was just like, my heart was beating so hard, and I was trying to keep my composure and be able to relay the words that I'd wanted to share. And it was a really unique experience. And I think what made it feel that much more amplified is, yes, there was 150 people in that audience, but that thing is still getting, it lives on a space that can be seen at any point in time. And I knew that then. And that was really intimidating. So, yeah, I'm still really thankful for that experience, for all it that definitely had the the life teaching ultra running teaching life, or that experience was influenced both ways for sure.
Absolutely. It's amazing because, I read somewhere that public speaking is the number one fear in the world. I read that there was some sort of government survey. I think it was Gallup poll or one of those, did a survey
Mhm.
on this, and people are more afraid of public speaking than they are even of dying. So the fact that you got up there and did that is absolutely amazing, being out of your comfort zone. To be honest, Krissy, I have to say, I never would have thought, unless you'd said that you would be nervous with that, because in this situation here, we're talking and we met for the first time and you're so easy to talk to and it's so fun, back and forth. So I never would have thought you'd actually be nervous in that situation, but it does make a lot of sense. So well done for getting out of your comfort zone in that way. It's an amazing achievement. That's not a question, I'm just saying it's an amazing achievement. So very cool. What was the other thing that popped into my head? Race directing itself. You said about race directing just now and the fact that you are behind the scenes. Again, you've probably spoken about this a little bit before now, but in terms of the aspects of race directing that you enjoy the most, I'd like to just get a little feel for your role in that way, because again, it's a different way of giving back to the sport, contributing, having your hand in a different way, other than just competing. So, yeah, what do you enjoy most about being a race director, please?
Oh, it's my team. I've worked with Tyler and Kevin for 7+ years now, and we've integrated a local timing company, Pacific Multisports, Mark and his team, and like just having the collaborative work to make that event, like just it's come up so much in the it's 22 years that I've been race directing that thing. Nuts. And when I took it over, my friends would hang out at the finish line and write time, like tear tags off the bibs and write times, or back up. Even registration was me taking paper forms to the Seattle and Bellingham running stores, and then they would mail them to me with a $10 check or $13 check, whatever it was. The event has changed quite a bit in those years, and that's taken a lot of like individual time and different people that have teamed up with me along the way. And then in these last 7 years, having the consistency of the same team has really allowed it to blossom. And it's such a joy to have that collaboration. And that is really what keeps me in it now. I'm definitely feeling like it might be time for Chuckanut to move on and find new hands to direct it. And especially if especially either if Kevin or Tyler decided that they were done, I'd be like, yeah, I really need to consider that, because the team aspect is really like a really life-giving part of Chuckanut. And then that expands out, right? We've got our core, we work together for the 5-6 months leading up to it, and then as we get closer to the event, there's more and more people that add on to that team, and we just get to feel that energy come in and then create what we do the third weekend of March every year.
Wow, it is an amazing thing to be doing. And again, it shows the people you meet along the way are a very special part of the journey as well. So I really think that gives a good mention to them and their contribution, your contribution, how you all work together as a team. Absolutely fantastic. So, a couple of other things, and we won't be ages and ages longer with this, but a couple of other topics to touch on here as well. Obviously, when it comes to the inspiration, the motivation, you have shared a lot with the world in this way, in terms of your book, in terms of TED Talks, in terms of coaching and different things. But if you did have to give advice to somebody who is starting out on a sort of a new journey with a dream or a goal, whether it's running related or not, um, I'd like to get your thoughts on maybe just one or two essential things that just to hammer home the life lessons, because we've talked about quite a lot here. I mean, we've talked about quite a few life lessons coming through, especially enjoying the process. Loving what you do. That's a big one. But there's a lot I've personally taken up. Could you share with us somebody listening to this, somebody you may never meet in your life, but they are, I suppose they can be at any stage, but you inspired me to touch on this with what you said earlier about people doing their first ultra and those people starting out, and how that's special to you, whether it's ultra running or not. Could you share with us just one or two sort of essential ingredients, like for cooking, that you would say for people to succeed in something they love doing? I know this is a big question, so I've tried to sort of hone it down a little bit, and I don't want you to give everything away, because obviously people need to coach with you, but maybe one or two things, just to inspire people. Thank you.
Right on. The two words that came to mind were joy and sponge. And I think that's what got me in. I just like, and I touched on it earlier of how like joyful running is for me. It's grounding. It brings me back to myself. So when choosing whatever this thing is that you're going to add to your life, like I hope it's something that you can like, even through the heart, like even when it, like today I did 10 3-minute intervals. Those aren't necessarily fun, but man, I felt good that I got that done afterwards. And like, so finding that even when it's like, just realizing that it's not always like what we think of joyful isn't just like rainbows and unicorns, like for lack of better words. It's like the whole process. And if the whole process can bring you joy, so being intentional about what you choose, so that is, it's not just something that, like when I'm interviewing clients for coaching, if their goal is to get a belt buckle and that's it, I'm not their coach, because I want the full integration of why this is coming to them. So that, and then the sponge piece, gosh, there weren't books. The internet was barely started. I just like soaked up so much wonderful information from the men. I didn't get to run with many women in my early career, but the few that I did, sponge from them as well. Just soaking in like their tidbits, what they'd learned from experience, and then applying. That was what was cool. I mean, having the gender difference was cool in my situation, because I had to look at what they were doing and see if it worked for me. It didn't, just because they did it didn't mean I did it. I had to take that like personal approach to what was going to work for me. And that's why meeting women that ran was gold, because like it was a lot more relatable. Yeah, so just like be really intentional about picking something that brings you full spectrum joy, and just soak up what you can from those that are around you, and then choose what works for you. Be intentional about it, not just because so and so wears this fancy shoe means you have to wear it too. Like, sure, try it out, but make sure it works for you.
Wow, that's very, very powerful advice, in all fairness. Thank you, because throughout this talk, we have touched on quite a few things that are life lessons, tools for transformation. They are these types of things. But I really felt that if we sort of hit that right on the head, there'd be a couple of things to share. So thank you very much for that. Right, last couple of things then, and then we'll wrap that. By that, I do mean last two, and then we will wrap this up. Obviously, to give a mention to your coaching itself, um, as soon as we're talking about this anyway, and I want to ask you about this anyway. Um, Similar thing to the race director thing, really. I mean, what you enjoy most about it. Now, with this, we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, where you said about people starting out, what you just said about, the belt buckles. We've touched on it a little bit, but just to go a little bit deeper into your role with that in people's lives, because I love how you've touched on the holistic element as well, integrating this into every aspect of people's lives. So just in terms of like what it means to you when you see people achieving goals, yes, but becoming better versions of themselves, and that type of thing, more, what sort of goes through your mind when you see people reaching those levels and you've helped them get there, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and it's not always about reaching the goal. I feel like it's just witnessing. Like the more people share with me on our shared document and on on phone calls. Like, just to witness life is so fascinating to me, and to provide a sounding board based on the experience that I've had in a sport and in life. Like, some of the best conversations aren't even about running when I get on the phone with some of my clients. And I'm so thankful that people are willing to share with a perfect stranger. There's some I've never seen their face. I had a great experience at Chuckanut this year. Two of my clients were running, and so I was in, race director hat mode, and these individually, two people came up to chat with me, and I was like, gosh, their voice is so familiar. And once they finally said their name, I was like, oh, like, yes, I've spent so much time on the phone with you, but we didn't do a Zoom or video chat. So I'd never seen their faces before. And I just, that people I could, like, once I had that connection of like, oh, I know this much about this person. It's such a gift. I'm so thankful that a really dear, my first client, his name was Guy. He was the one that reached out and said, hey, I think you should coach. And 9 months, I stayed in touch with him, and like 6 or 9 months later, we agreed, and he was my guinea pig. And I am so thankful for that life pivot to add that to what I get to do now. Yeah, it's awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an amazing thing. I think that giving back in that way and contributing to people's lives is sort of one of the highest things that we can aim for in life. And again, in a different type of way, it's the reason why I do these and try and put the inspiration out there and everything. It's a very, very powerful thing to be doing. It's very meaningful and profound, So I'm glad we touched on that. And really, the last question for today, is obviously your future plans, because during this time, we've touched on possibly moving on from race directing to or changing races or whatnot. We've talked about different things you're doing in terms of races themselves. We've talked a little bit about the book that hopefully will come out, and everything like that, the new one. So there's all these different things. But in terms of what's lighting your fire now, given everything you've achieved already, in any area, because obviously this could be in running, but it might well be in something else. And I don't mind how far ahead in time you'd like to go or whatever, just to get a feel really for what's inspiring you from 2023 onwards, basically.
Oh man. Yeah, it's a total, like, from what we've talked about to like give that current or future thinking is actually like pretty different. I mentioned at one point, I'm turning 46, and I really wonder if I am in like midlife re-examining everything. It's kind of a cool space to be in, scary at times. Um, there's all the wonderful hormone changes that go along with this point of life that I'm very sarcastically referencing. And I just signed up for or not just, well, kind of just, I'm doing the Sawatch 50/50 race the end of September. So adding another event after the Tiger Claw in May, and loving this new way of racing. Like, it's a very different approach. I was laughing. I was looking at the results from Tiger Claw, and I didn't know where I finished. For 2 decades, I never had to look at the results because I always knew I was probably 1, 2, or 3. It was just this weird phenomena, like, to then check the results on after Tiger Claw. So I'm kind of loving this new approach, and still getting to be a part of something I love so much. What feels so different is I am my partner and he has 2 kids that have just endeared themselves to me, and our little 4-pack is pretty life changing in terms of this very independent, like I talked about, having a life that was very simplified and keeping the bucket balanced to be able to do these big physical efforts. It's different having a really like a partner and kiddos in life that just, yeah, they fill that bucket in different ways, and then make running a little bit more challenging sometimes. And I love it. I love trying to figure out how this balance works. And the other piece is I find myself really attracted to a profession called either death doula or end-of-life doula, or somebody that accompanies people through that last or who knows, but another phase of life. And I've done some training in that. I'm going to be volunteering at hospice. And I'm really curious to see how that shows up in my life, because it lights a fire for me. And it doesn't feel too far removed from what I'm doing right now as it is. Like, I'm moving through phases of life with people, witnessing them, and hopefully providing some sort of grounding source as they move through it. I mean, end of life is one of those things. So yeah, a little different than like signing up for races and tons of races, but finding this family connection that just is, yeah, really filling my bucket, and then seeing where this end of life, um, I'll just call it end of life doula, takes me.
Oh, that is so cool. I mean, well, first of all, Krissy, I mean, with your family and everything, and you're all doing well together, I'm happy for you. That's wonderful to hear about. And I knew there'd be a new challenge in there. I had a feeling there'd be a new challenge in there. And that's cool. I mean, end of life, it's something that it's not talked about enough. It is obviously something everyone will go through in one way or another. And yeah, I mean, to be there to help people in those final stages, or even to be with people as they're transitioning and whatnot, I mean, it's a very privileged position to be in, I would say, actually. And that's in a funny type of way, it's not that surprising to me, because all the way through this talk, I've got that type of spiritual is not the right type of not the right type of word, but even when you've been saying about the races and things, this awareness that you have of the world and yourself in relation to it, and some of the depth of some of your answers that has gone sort of way beyond just the athletic side of things, which I love. I mean, I absolutely love that. Bear in mind, I do these for the inspiration and this type of thing. If I was just talking about sport, I would have practiced in, and I wouldn't be doing it now for as long as I have. So I mean that as a compliment. But in a funny type way, I can actually see how that fits with you, you
Mhm.
know. I had this feeling we were just scratching the surface, and it sounds like we are just scratching the surface today. But that's very cool. Well, anyway, I'd like to wrap this up by saying, firstly, thank you for taking time out of your morning and being as busy as you are, and still making time for this. I'm genuinely super grateful for that. More importantly than that, or equally as importantly as that, I also really appreciate you being such an open book in this interview. I mean, I know it's the type of person you are and everything, but like I just said, the way we've gone in depth with certain things, you don't have to do that, because you've done a lot of podcasts, and you've done a lot of this type of thing, but you still chose to do that. So I also just like to extend my gratitude for that aspect of being, well, an open book's the best way I can think of to put it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Liam. I really appreciate the thoughtful, intentional questions. And in those questions, you've gotten me to verbalize some stuff that has just been bouncing around in my head. So some of those ramblings, or even speaking about my partner as kids, that's not something that I've been as vocal about. Like, you wouldn't see them on my Instagram. Like, it's a very like personal and private piece of my life that I keep there. And yeah, just the way you approach and listen and ask questions, I think helps bring that out in people. And I am an open book, but like that encouragement also helps that happen. So this is great what you're doing.
Thank you. I mean, that's a great compliment from somebody who's achieved as much as you have in life, not just in terms of the races, but in terms of everything, in terms of the way you contribute to people's lives and everything. It's a really great compliment. And thank you, because I challenged myself to say, okay, I want to ask some questions here that haven't been heard. She hasn't heard 100 times before. That's what I said to myself. And I said, there's bound to be certain things we have to talk about to set the scene and everything, but I want to go deeper, so to hear that that's happened to some degree is really nice for me as well. So thank you very much. Anyway, I won't keep you any further. Have a great rest of your day. Obviously, you've got a lot more of it to go than I have. And just thank you again for everything. When I release this, I will send it to you as well, just so you can see how it came out. And other than that, good luck with the race end of September, and good luck with the end of life side of things
Thank,
as well. And I hope it all goes really well.
Thank you. Yeah. And the weirdest thing about these kind of things is like, I know very little about you. The questions are all coming one way and the answers don't get to come from a conversation. It's more, like you said, interview. So I bet there's quite a story there that if I dig back in your podcast, would I learn more? Or is it all you ask?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of bits and pieces of me throughout the podcast. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.